Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Latin America and Caribbean Ethnography seminar series. This is our second session for the autumn term. The seminar is an initiative hosted by CLACS, which is part of the Institute of Languages, Cultures, and Societies at the School of Advanced Study, University of London. The seminar is run in collaboration with CROLAC, of the Center for Research on Latin America and Caribbean at Queen Mary University, with CISRUL, which is the Center for Citizenship, Civil Society, and Rule of Law at the University of Aberdeen, and the Spanish National Research Council. We are three conveners running the seminar. So Ainhoa Montoya, who is here with us today, Jessica Clare, who unfortunately couldn't join us, and myself, Denise Roman. Today we have a fascinating talk, and I am delighted to introduce Emma Frazer, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Bristol. Her talk is titled Participant Ethnography Research in Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro, Exploring Women's Empowerment Through Playing Football. So Emma will have between 30 and 40 minutes for her talk, and afterwards we will open up for a Q&A, aiming to finish around 6 p.m. in the UK. Please just remember to keep your microphones on mute during Emma's talk. And afterwards, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function available in Zoom, or you can always pop your questions on the chat box and I will read those out. We are recording the talk, but not the Q&A, and we will make it available soon at the CLACS website shortly. So without further ado, Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. So hi everyone. Can you see my screen there, Denise? That one sec. Okay. Yeah. So my name's Emma Frazer. As they said, I'm in the final year of my PhD in Latin American Studies at the University of Bristol. And I'm researching the impact of playing football on women's lives in Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro. And in particular, I'm looking at how playing football empowers women beyond the pitch. For my research, I conducted participant ethnographic fieldwork in Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro over 10 months, which basically means that I went out there and I played football with as many groups as I could, and then I asked the women what they thought about playing. So in today's presentation, I'm going to give an outline about the research I conducted, the results I found, bearing in mind that I still have a year left of this. So to give you some context, I'm going to begin by talking about the last World Cup. I don't know if any of you remember it. Brazil beat the great footballing nation of Panama and drew with Jamaica. Argentina's only point was a draw against South Africa, and both teams were knocked out early in the group stages. I'm of course talking about the Women's World Cup rather than the men's, where Brazil reached the quarters and Messi won it for Argentina. The disparity in the levels of their success isn't by chance. It's the result of decades of sexism in which women have been systematically excluded and discouraged from playing. In Brazil, women's football was banned by the state for nearly 40 years, which means that women weren't legally allowed to play until 1979. A Brazilian academic called Ida Bonfim published a book last year which tracks the history of women's football in Brazil. She shows that actually women's football was very popular at the start of the 20th century prior to the ban. And it's clear that some women did continue to play football through those years of prohibition, but they were far fewer in number and they received no social or institutional support. Meanwhile, in Argentina, as recently as 2017, the women's team had effectively been disbanded after 2 years with no coach, no fixtures, no FIFA ranking. And in case you think that situation has improved much, just 6 months ago, 3 players stepped down from the Argentine national team in protest, which you can see in the Instagram post there. So they've been told that there were insufficient funds for them to receive food with their training or travel expenses. It seems quite unlikely that Messi is told the same. So the foundation of my thesis lies in part in the idea that the subordinate nature of the women's game in many ways reflects the subordinate position of women in society. Similarly, as women overcome barriers in order to play football and participate on an equal footing, they're overcoming societal barriers too. As a result, this leads to their empowerment off the pitch as well, both personally and in a group, across many different areas of their lives. So that's what my research is exploring, with a focus on women who play at an amateur level. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So before anything else, what is ethnographic research? And what exactly did I do out there? I realized that this seminar is part of an ethnography series, so you're probably all very familiar with the term, but I think it's worth at least clarifying how I understand it. In 2011, Emerson, Fretz and Shaw wrote a book called Writing Ethnographic Field Notes, and they defined ethnography as the study of groups and people as they go about their everyday lives. They highlight the importance of ethnography being an immersive experience in which the researcher is committed to getting close to the activities and everyday experiences of other people. So that's what I did. From September 2022 to June 2023, last year, but centered around the everyday experience of women playing football. I first went to Buenos Aires and then to Rio de Janeiro. And across the two cities, I played with 13 different football teams. I conducted 24 interviews, and I had more than 200 players complete my questionnaire. I also kept a field journal of my time out there. So between these different methods of gathering data, I'm able to triangulate my findings, which is particularly necessary when collecting qualitative data. In terms of interpreting my data, the methodological framework I'm using relies on something called grounded theory, which was first developed by Glaser and Strauss in 1967, which they defined as the discovery of theory from data. I've then been using systematic coding around core categories in order to find trends and draw out the theories that emerge, rather than imposing preformed ideas. Glaser and Strauss have actually since diverged in their understanding of the method, so my chosen style is more reflective of the three-stage coding system of Strauss than the substantive coding of Glaser. Basically, what this methodology means for my research is that I've let the data tell me its own story rather than going and looking for certain results. So while I was out there, I was just trying to ask the players lots of questions about their lives and the impact generally of playing football on their lives. I think it's also worth noting that Glaser and Strauss suggested that strong prior theoretical knowledge and hypotheses should be avoided. But that's quite tricky, as some academics, including Kathy Shamaz, have noticed. Shamaz instead suggests that the research should be theoretically informed, but not theoretically preformed. Given that I'm a woman and I've played football my entire life, I did not enter the field with no knowledge on the topic of my research. But I had originally thought I would research the empowerment of women through playing football, and I instead focused my research on just the impact generally, asking them really general questions and without assuming an outcome to look at different areas. As it turns out, from the data I've gathered, I've learned that playing football has actually empowered women across so many areas of their lives and in ways that I wouldn't have predicted. And this methodology also lets me keep the women's own stories at the centre of the research, as it's their experiences that have informed the themes. And it also means I haven't quite finished my analysis ahead of next year, so it could still change. I could still get some new insights. So before I went out to Latin America, I had to get ethics approval for my research. You can see there a photo of me with the consent forms that I was giving out with the questionnaires with one of the teams. Doing the ethics approval was a useful practice to make me more aware of how to conduct my research sensitively and fairly. It was good to think about where the interviews would be conducted, although that actually didn't follow a plan at all. And it built my confidence a bit as well. Without learning the ethics beforehand, I might have been tempted to offer something small in return for people doing the interview or something like that. But instead, I was just asking them if they wanted to participate, which I think made the research richer, more genuine, and kept the relationship better balanced too. But a drawback from getting the ethics approval, which you should still get, but a drawback is that I kept my questions a bit more lighthearted, particularly in the questionnaire, because I got approval for the questionnaire before I went out there. So in hindsight, I would have liked to include some more personal questions, probably about their age, race, profession, sexuality, the neighborhood they live in. Not to have the personal information, but so that I could look for more insights across the data, look for more correlations between the answers, and particularly so I could compare across the two cities a bit more. But yeah, next time. I decided that the focus of my research would be on amateur women's football based in organised groups or teams, because most of the existing literature on women's football in Latin America focuses on top level players. So you can see the works of Mark Birham, Gabby Garton, Caitlin Davids-Fisher, and a few others. But the majority of women who play football are amateurs. So I wanted to look at how football impacted their lives. And the other reason to focus on amateur women's football is that I was undertaking participant ethnographic research, and I'm not a professional footballer. So I thought it might be too difficult to access the professional players in the same way. As it turned out, in Buenos Aires, I did end up conducting research with some professional players. I trained regularly with a feeder team for a professional club, and I played one memorable game with the professionals, which was very stressful, but also a great experience. And in Rio, I played alongside some semi-professional footballers as well, who did invite me to their training sessions, but they were after I'd left Brazil in the end. I also decided not to focus on futsal because it's got some quite big differences to regular football. The ball is smaller and heavier. You don't throw the ball in, you kick it in, and a couple of other things. But also futsal is more socially accepted as a game that women play. So I thought that it wouldn't challenge the gendered expectations in the same way. In Buenos Aires, there were so many teams to play with that I'd have struggled to fit in another team. But in Rio, it might have helped me to find more players and teams. So that sort of leads me on to how did I find the footballers? The difference between my experiences in finding footballers across the two cities was huge. So in Buenos Aires, I just found people everywhere. I went to a random event on my second night there. I was immediately put in contact with the mixed team. I went to another event the following week. I was chatting to someone whose cousin plays. She put me in contact with her. And I met a few teams through that girl, and some more people who I interviewed. So gatekeepers were really important for my experience in Buenos Aires, whereas in Rio, it was sort of more based on the snowball effect. It was just really hard. So in Buenos Aires, I met up with a couple of the academics that my supervisor knows. One of them ended up leading to me being in contact with Chiri, a professional goalkeeper for Independiente and River Plate. So she took me to a few training sessions. And in terms of where you don't expect to do an interview, we did an interview in the car on the way back from a training session when we were stuck in bank holiday traffic, and we were in the car for a couple of hours. Another academic who really helped me is called Nemesia Ikos. She's just at the heart of everything sports related in Buenos Aires. She's got a book about running that's really great. Even when I was hiking in Patagonia, I met people who knew her, and she put me in contact with a lot of people. She introduced me to someone who was part of the Mafalda tournament, which is huge in women's football in Buenos Aires. It's got right through from very beginners learning how to kick the ball to quite an advanced level. So I ended up training with 3 teams there. Nemesia also introduced me to a team that was a feminist football team. There were a few that I heard of in Buenos Aires who have sort of feminist values at the core of their football teams, which makes it a bit different. Perhaps the strangest team I found in Buenos Aires, or the strangest way of meeting them, was Cuba, which is the feeder team for Club Atlético Defensores de Belgrano, a professional team. And they're also linked with the University of Buenos Aires. And I had done research before, and I'd heard rumors of them online. So I just went to the university sports fields and had a walk around, and I saw someone in what looked like football kit. So I went over and introduced myself, and I explained my research and asked if they could put me in contact with their coach, which they did. That was a bit strange because that was the only team where I was introduced through the coach rather than through the players. And it was definitely a different experience meeting the team, because there was more of an initial gap between myself and the players. And the integration happened once I started to train with them, and I was able to chat with them more as an equal rather than as someone who was associated with the coach. So I went to Buenos Aires before I went to Rio, and I'd expected my Brazilian experience to be similar, but it was so different. In fact, Mark Birham's research, which wasn't published at the time, has found that 15,000 women in Brazil play in competitions at some levels. But this compares unfavorably to 27,000 in Argentina. If we take these numbers, we see that Brazil's population is 5 times bigger, but Buenos Aires' population is double. It means that there are nearly 20 times more women in Buenos Aires who are playing football compared to Rio. So it's no wonder that it was more difficult for me to find players when I was there. Saying that, I found my first team in Rio on my very first morning there when I went for a run along Copacabana Beach. I spotted a group of women doing football training on the beach, and their name was a play on words for the word empowerment. So at this point, I thought it was going to be really easy to find women's teams. But it took me another 7 weeks to find another football team. It was partly due to the time of year, because the city basically shut down over Carnival for 3 weeks. And it was partly because, unbeknownst to me, it was the off season for football. So a lot of the teams had wound down then as well. And it took me a bit longer to make contacts because my Portuguese is weaker than my Spanish, so I was less confident. And in the end, it was by speaking to some women when I was surfing that I found someone who knew some football players. So that's why I've included a picture of me surfing. She passed me the team names so that I could look them up on Instagram. And from there, I was able to make contact. I used Instagram a lot for my field work, looking for teams, reaching out to people. It's quite a personal way of doing it. And yeah, no one had a problem with it. It seemed like quite a good way of doing it. So in Rio, it was through contacting these teams on Instagram and then contacting.
So I don't know if you're in tomorrow. I know it's so I worked all what do.
Thank you. So it's contacting going to some teams, and then they knew some other teams, so I linked to them. And then there was, and then I turned up at a training session, and there was an advert for another team, so I joined that way. So yeah, there was lots of different ways of finding teams. And I also found one through my online research where I contacted a charity that included a picture of girls playing football. And they actually didn't get back to me for nearly a year. I'd contacted them before I went out at all. And they got back to me just before I left Rio. So I managed to go and meet them. That was really interesting. And then there were a few teams that I found through people I met over my time in Rio, but training sessions were just cancelled every week, so I was never able to meet them in the end. And there were some semi-professional players who invited me to their sessions, but it was outside of when I was in Brazil. And then there was also a tournament I was meant to attend, and that was cancelled or postponed due to violence in the favela. So these cancellations are reflective of my experience in Rio more generally. Training sessions were frequently cancelled due to rain. Players would cancel their interviews with me. They'd forget to bring their questionnaires. And this all sort of brings me on to the drawbacks of conducting participant ethnographic research, in my experience. So cancellations were a big problem. Sometimes training was cancelled when I was meant to do the questionnaires and conduct an interview, and then it would just mean I couldn't gather any of that data. In Rio, there were 14 training sessions that were cancelled due to rain. So it was quite disruptive. Whereas in Buenos Aires, it only happened for 2 tournaments that I was meant to attend. The differences were primarily seasonal rather than cultural, as it was going into winter by the time I left Rio. But in Rio, there were also cancellations for police violence in different areas when you couldn't go into those areas. Another drawback I faced in my data gathering, which I wouldn't face with archival research, for instance, was the logistical problems of trying to get to different football practices around the city. So football training takes place on evenings or weekends. There's only a limited number of sessions I could attend. If a team trains twice a week, I had to decide whether I wanted to be better integrated with that team and attend both sessions, or if it was better for me to try to meet more teams instead. In both cities, I made sure I had one team which I trained with consistently so that I could be better integrated with them. And then I would sort of mix and match with the other ones. Both cities face enormous traffic problems, which is makes it much more difficult to get to sessions than you might think. especially when I was using public transport. So in Buenos Aires, it would frequently take me over double the time it said on Google Maps. In Rio, it could take me 2 hours to get there and half an hour to get back. And in both cities, buses would often take an hour to arrive rather than the 10 minutes they were meant to. Going to all of the training sessions was more tiring than might be expected. I'd have to work out how to fit in the different sessions and contact different people about attending and gathering data in terms of questionnaires and interviews. I'd need to make sure that I ate sufficiently far in advance, and then work out which buses to take. And then because of training being in the evening, I'd inevitably get home late at night. It wasn't unusual for me to get back to my flat at midnight. I'd be absolutely exhausted and starving hungry. And because the other thing about my research is that aside from it all being in a foreign language with lots of new people in an unfamiliar setting, it was also a very physical exercise. I was playing a couple of hours of football, often 5 times a week. So in Rio, for example, I'd get back from a Friday evening session at midnight. And then on a Saturday morning, I'd have 2 back-to-back sessions. The first one starting at 7 a.m. and the second one continuing into the afternoon. So it was physically tiring as well as mentally tiring to be trying to engage with people and remember what I was experiencing for my field journal later and all that kind of thing. And the other drawback I faced from conducting participant ethnographic research was again linked to the physicality of the research style, and that was that I got injured. So in Buenos Aires, I managed to avoid any serious injuries. I only faced 2 minor injuries and I was able to play through them. In Rio, my injuries were a bit more severe. I had a ball that hit me in the eye, not around, but in it on the eyeball. So I couldn't see properly for a few days. I injured my leg and then my ribs, both quite painfully. I was just about able to play through them. And then finally, I ruptured the ligaments in my ankle from heading the ball and landing badly in a game. So after that, I could barely stand, never mind walk. I still had a month left in Brazil, but for a while, I couldn't even get the bus to the training sessions to watch. So it really brought my research to a screeching halt. Although I did manage to set up a few interviews with contacts that I'd already made. So I've just listed a number of the drawbacks conducting participant ethnographic research, but despite them all, I do think it's an excellent way of conducting research. So you can see here just some of the teams that I was playing with, the different girls and women I was training with, the different kind of settings I was in. The main benefit that I found from playing football with the women was that I appeared more like an equal. So this meant it was much easier to make connections, and the women received me warmly, which might not have been the case otherwise, although they were all just really warm and friendly. The insider-outsider status was definitely blurred, because it's not uncommon for new players to join football teams. So in many ways, I could have just been one of them. I didn't feel like an equal with the professional team when I was sat on the side, and I didn't feel like an equal when I was introduced by the coach to the team. But once I started playing football with the team, the differences just melted away. Once you're kicking a ball around, everyone relaxes and you just become one of them. As a result of playing football with people, I was sometimes invited to events after training too, whether just for a drink and a snack or to keep playing football or for a party. As a foreign person abroad, it can be quite hard to meet locals. So this gave me a much greater insight into their lives and also allowed me to continue to integrate with the players and to see how football affected their lives beyond the pitch. I expected to feel more like an outsider because of being British. That mostly wasn't an issue in the end. The 2 cities are quite cosmopolitan, so the players were used to meeting foreign people. The times when this was less the case were in the 2 teams I played with that were in sort of slum towns. So in Villa 31 in Buenos Aires and in the Complexo de Peña favela in Rio de Janeiro. Amongst those players, I did feel a bit more separate, but even then, the differences soon disappeared once we were playing football together. And these 2 teams formed the perfect example of why conducting participant ethnographic research can be so beneficial. The team in Villa 31 is called La Nuestra. I played with them every week throughout my time in Buenos Aires. I got to know the girls and they'd invite me into their small groups for training exercises. They'd greet me with kisses at the start of training. And I started to feel a lot more like I was one of them. But throughout the rest of the city, Villa 31 is known as a bit of a no-go area. But I was able to just wander in and out in order to play football. I got to know some of the local residents. I did my grocery shopping there. And I think the experience worked in multiple ways, because if I'd only heard about those girls, I might have, I don't know, had a different impressions. I might have felt sorry for them. I might have thought of them as people who lived in a slum and didn't have many opportunities. But by playing football with them, I got to hear about their jobs, their aspirations, the places they wanted to travel to, their conversations about their friends, and a bit more of an insight into their lives there and the role that football plays. I'm now going to read you a small sample of my field journal from my first session with La Nuestra, so you can hear about my first impressions and also see the ways in which a field journal can be useful. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable, so you can imagine it, and I'll let you know when I've finished at the end and you can open your eyes. I took the bus from a couple of blocks away from my flat. It travelled down through the centre of the city and then to the outskirts of the financial district, where I could see manicured lawns and impressive skyscrapers, before turning sharply under an overpass to the literal other side of the railway tracks. Stepping out was like a completely different city, as if I had finally arrived in the Latin America that I recognise. There were people selling bags and shoes laid out on blankets on the floor. The ground was dirty, the pavements were cracked, and the streets were busy. As I walked down the road, I went past loads of small kiosks, bars, and restaurants, many with blackboards outside, along with people selling street food. There were throngs of people walking around, and a heavy police presence on one street corner. The buildings were more shambolic, with layers built one on top of the other, seemingly at disparate times, and there were electricity wires galore, strung from one side of the street to the other. After walking down the street for 5 minutes, I came across the pitch, La Cancha. It was a large, good quality astroturf, caged in, with concrete bleachers around each side. Approaching the pitch was like being in a film. Around the pitch were higgledy-piggledy houses piled on top of each other, painted in bright colours, with stairs on the outside. There was reggaeton music blaring from a bar on the corner. People, men, stood around the outside sharing beers, children running around, and on the far corner, someone appeared to be fixing a motorbike, with bright sparks flying out. I went up to the bleachers and observed for 10 minutes before the training kicked off. There were men playing with children on the pitch, with the children being both boys and girls. At one end, there was a group of young men, late teenagers, playing together, with one girl of a similar age. I checked to see if people had noticed me or not, but I think I seemed to blend in. Most people in this neighbourhood seemed to have darker features and black hair, but a few people were as pale as me. I was wearing an oversized grey hoodie with some old Adidas trackies that I noticed in this moment, frayed at the bottom, and my old, quite dirty Nike AstroTurf boots. When I began training, I took off my layers and I was wearing some plain black Nike sports shoes and a white t-shirt. I looked just like any of the other players, with my hair in a simple ponytail, which again matched the players. Okay, you can open your eyes if you shut them. So hopefully that gave you a bit of an image of the kind of experience I had. It's an environment that I wouldn't have been able to access had I not been playing football. And it means I was able to learn about the experiences of the women who I otherwise wouldn't have been able to talk to. It gave me a far more thorough understanding of the impact of football on women's lives in the city, and it gave me a broader audience to interact with. It also allowed me to see what football means to people of different demographics. You can see that they're the top two pictures of the side with the Argentina flag behind. They were with La Nuestra. And meanwhile, on the top right-hand side, that's a team of lawyers that I played with in Rio. So it's quite different. But from playing football, I got to mix with a team of doctors, a team of lawyers, people who lived in the Villa Miseria and the favela. I made friends with women from all sorts of backgrounds and was able to ask them questions about their lives that weren't taken as intrusive because we all had the same shared interest of football. So from what I've said so far, you might already have an inkling of what I'm going to say now, but this next section is about why I think it's valid and important to study football. So this graph shows you there are more than 250 million players coming from every country in the world. Last year's Men's Champions League final was watched by approximately 450 million people. And according to FIFA, 1.5 billion people watched Messi lift the World Cup. In contrast, the Super Bowl reached a viewership of 123 million this year, and that's with the boost from the Taylor Swift effect. So you can see that association football, soccer, really is an integral part of life for so many people. It's often looked down upon and not considered to be suitable for academia, in contrast to other parts of their lives like literature or politics. But football's the most popular sport in the world. We can see from this graph, how few women few people watch the final of the Women's World Cup or the Women's Champions League, you can barely make out the figure on the graph. It's still clear that football forms a part of everyday life for millions of people around the globe, which makes it a really strong resource for understanding the culture of those who play or watch. And it provides insight into the social history of countries with football. So for a lot of people, the team they support or the fact they play will be an important part of their personal identity. And in a similar way, for some countries, it's a defining feature of their national identity. When people think about Brazil or Argentina, they tend to think of them as footballing nations. Their footballing prowess is often one of the first things that comes to mind. And this hasn't just naturally occurred. In both countries, football's been used by the state to promote particular ideologies and to unite and represent the nation. And the players are held up as examples of what makes a good citizen. But the problem is that in both countries, these roles have been given only to men. Eduardo Archetti actually wrote an entire book about the link between football and masculinity in Argentina, proposing that football is a powerful masculine expression of national capabilities and potentialities. This implies that football is for men and that the potential of the nation lies in the hands of men and masculinity, thus excluding women from football and the nation, as well as reflecting the status quo in which women have been excluded from the public sphere and positions of power. So when women play football, they're participating in the representation of their national identity. They're improving the visibility of women beyond the football pitch, and they're challenging the idea that the ideal citizen is male. They're also able to harness some of that aforementioned power of football for the cause of women. And this is all despite the fact that women who choose to play have faced endless derogatory remarks about their appearance, sexuality, life choices, all because they play football, which is the sport of the nation. So from what I've said so far, football might seem important and full of significance. I would actually say it's what could be called a zero institution, which means it can be used and contested for any message or cause. It's its popularity that makes it a potent mechanism, which makes it a really interesting lens through which to study people and society. It's also why it's essential that women football players are treated equally to men. Football doesn't just reflect, but also creates culture. Perceptions around football are able to change society's views, much as our players' experiences are able to help them beyond the pitch. Women who play football have been subjected to all sorts of abuse, stigma, negative stereotyping, and that's beyond the fact that the state has tried to control them by banning them from playing in Brazil, refusing to invest in them in Argentina. At one point, when they did legalize it in the 90s in Brazil, women still had to have a certain length of hair. So there's been a lot of control around it. And many of the players that I spoke with talked about how they hadn't been allowed to play when they were younger because their families didn't want them to, or because there weren't any teams available. They talked about how it was assumed that they were a lesbian if they played football and that was a bad thing, or about how it'd make them stand out from the other girls and how it wasn't something the girls were meant to do. So in the face of all of that, why do women choose to play football? And what impact does it have on their lives? From what the players have told me, it seems like there are three main categories that have led women to playing football in Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro: familiarity, health, and socializing. So in terms of familiarity, we've already seen the importance of football at a national level, but at a personal level, the data gathered from my questionnaire shows the prevalence of football in the players' lives as they were growing up. So you can see here, in both cities, more than 60% of players grew up with a member of their family playing football, which more than 53% said their dad played football, more than 45% said they had a brother who played. So it's not surprising that this interest in football in the family had an impact on the women too. But we can see that less than 6% said their sister played football in either city, and almost no mothers played at all. So the women have really gone against the grain by taking it up. It's worth noting that more than a third of the players who I interviewed cited family disapproval as a reason why they didn't play football as a teenager. But in the questionnaire, more than 90% of women agreed that their family approves of them playing now. So although lots of parents seemingly didn't want their girls to play football, often due to religious reasons, the women now mostly do have their approval. Although this shows another barrier women have faced in order to play, it also demonstrates that increased visibility of women playing football can change the perception of what's suitable for women, as well as what women are capable of doing. In terms of their health, women cited the benefits of playing football for both their physical and mental health. 100% of all women who answered the questionnaire agreed that playing football keeps them healthy. This reason was also mentioned by many of those who were interviewed, including my friend Maida in Rio, who said that it was due to developing health problems that she had to improve her lifestyle and turn to football. Maida went on to explain that since starting to play football, she feels more confident too. And this was another theme that emerged from the data. 71% of players who were surveyed in Buenos Aires and 85% in Rio agreed that playing football made them feel more confident off the pitch. A number of the women spoke about the importance of playing football for their mental health too. So, for instance, Belen, who I interviewed in Buenos Aires, explained in the quote that I've written there, football is something more. Beyond the physical benefits of the sport, it's a space for mental health, to find oneself, to be able to relax and be oneself. This is corroborated by the questionnaire results, in which more than 94% of the players surveyed agreed that they feel like they could be themselves when they're playing, and 100% agreed that they feel better after they've been to play football. So the impact of football on the players' health, both physical and mental, is quite apparent. The third main reason for playing football is the social side, which was highlighted by a lot of the players who were interviewed. Vanessa was incredibly proud of her team, explaining that they complete one another and that she loves football because of her team. In the questionnaire, more than 95% of the players agreed that they were friends with their teammates, and 89% agreed that they can discuss difficulties in their lives with their teammates. One of the players who I interviewed, Manu, she explained that she lives in the Mangueira favela, and that in the favelas, women don't have many spaces that are their own, or in which they can integrate. So being able to play football together provides a space, and it strengthens the community and the women. This is again corroborated by the questionnaire results, which show that more than 96% of the women agree that their football teams form an important community in their life. The sense of community that's formed through their football teams also helps the players to develop a sense of belonging, which is an important theme that's emerged from the data. The significance of football teams helping to create a sense of belonging was clear with most of the teams with which I played, but none more so than La Nuestra in Buenos Aires, who I talked about before. Everyone in the team lived locally in the Villa 31, but a number of the women had moved there from Bolivia or Paraguay, including the coach, Julia. At the birthday celebrations of La Nuestra, which I attended, Julia was made to give a speech. It was quite tearful, but one of her principal points was that she had always felt like an immigrant, but here she had found her place in the world. The importance of finding a community to belong to cannot be overstated. It provides so many benefits to life, including mutual support, cooperation, and social capital. Again, this is a theme that's emerged from the data. I'm now going to add a fourth point why women want to play football, and that's one that's often overlooked in academic circles, and that's that playing football is fun. So I realise this isn't a picture of me playing football, but it is a picture of me with Kata, who I'm going to talk about now. She wanted us to take the photo with the consent form that goes with doing the interviews. I think it's an interesting photo as well because it shows where we did our interview, which was very noisy, which makes it quite difficult in a second or third language. But yeah, you just end up doing them anywhere really, I found. So playing football, many of the benefits that you can find from football can be found in other ways, from other sports, but kicking a ball around provides its own special feel. And so the perfect example of this is Rata, who's in the slide. She's an ex-international. She played for Brazil. She played in the 1980s, so the very early days of women being legally permitted to play football. And in my interview with her, she said, "Football was born within me, together with me, this love of football." In fact, Agatha loved football so much that when she was 12 years old and her parents banned her from playing, she left home instead of giving up the game. So taking her ball with her and one bag of possessions, she went and lived on the streets for years so that she could keep playing football. And even now, when you talk to her, she talks about how much she loves football and how, even though she's injured and she shouldn't play, when a ball's rolling towards you, you just can't help yourself but go to kick it. So now for the crux of my thesis, how does playing football empower women off the pitch? For this study, empowerment was understood simply to mean being more confident about improving your or your group's circumstances. Having been given this translated in the questionnaire, 85% of players in Buenos Aires and 95% in Rio said that they thought that playing football was empowering. Another 74% of the women of Buenos Aires and 88% in Rio said that they thought that playing football had empowered them in other areas of their life beyond the pitch too. This was further evidenced by various stories that were told to me by the players, both in interviews and during informal chats. So I'm now going to give the examples that were told to me by 4 different players to demonstrate how playing football has empowered these women off the pitch. Player number 1 is Mika in Buenos Aires. She was one of the first people I met there. She told me that her parents had banned her from playing football, which was because her mum is religious and thought that all women who played football were butch and lesbians. But by deciding to play football anyway when she started university, Mika realised for the first time that she could choose how to live her life and decide for herself. Choosing to play football in the face of so much antipathy made it a strong decision and showed Mika that she could decide her own fate beyond the football pitch as well. Player number 2 is Ana Flavia in Rio. She founded the team Futebol, and by doing so, she created a safe space. She identifies as Black lesbian, and she told me that life living with Bolsonaro as president was difficult. But football provided her with an escape, because Futebol was a space where people could be themselves and have fun. She also told me that the club had helped her to develop in her career, because she was naturally very shy, but she had to be more vocal with football and manage people. She was able to develop those skills at football and then take them into the workplace. Player number 3 is Georgelina in Buenos Aires. She very openly and honestly told me that it was through playing football that she gained the confidence to leave her abusive husband. By playing with the group of women on her team, she was able to see a different way of life and that there was a life beyond her violence. Sadly, this story was also repeated by a player in Rio at another club. The community created through football empowered these women enormously. In both cases, they were able to leave their abusive partners. Finally, there's player number 4, Flavia, who was also in Buenos Aires. She's a mother, and she explained to me that playing football gave her time out from being a parent, and that she wouldn't apologise for it because men wouldn't either. The club provided them with a visible network of support to discuss difficult matters, such as how to handle reports of domestic violence. They also used their club to take political action and support different causes. For instance, when they were at the 2019 march in favour of legalising abortions, they ended up circling off a pitch in the middle of the protest and playing football there. So they use football as a visual example of what women are physically capable of when they're allowed to choose, and in this way they use football to challenge the idea of gendered roles, rebelling against sexist expectations, and demanding agency over their own bodies. So hopefully from these examples, you can see how playing football gave me access to very personal details about women's lives, which otherwise would have been difficult to discover. By studying their lives through the lens of football, I gained insight into the everyday challenges that the players face beyond the pitch, and the data that I gathered demonstrates the positive impact that playing football has had on their lives. By using a mixed methods approach, I've been able to triangulate my findings and to make sure that I'm not being informed just by an anomaly. We can see how football has helped players to develop new skills in the workplace, improve their physical and mental health, build their confidence, create a supportive network, and to foster a sense of belonging. Playing football has helped to raise the visibility of women participating in activities that might be deemed unsuitable for them, and that in turn paves the way for them to confront gender inequality in other areas of their lives. So by playing football, we can see that women are empowered at a personal level within their communities, and beyond that, to challenge their status within the nation. Finally, it's my hope that this research will demonstrate not only the empowering impact that playing football can have on the lives of women, but also the positive changes it could lead to in the future. The men's game is huge and within a very well-defined structure, so hopefully women will be able to harness that existing structure and the dominance of the men's game to their own advantage. As the women's game continues to grow, the visibility of women playing will increase too, which will not only help to normalise the presence of women in what were previously deemed men's spaces, but will also help to lead to better investment and more women being empowered. So we can see that the growth of women's football holds great potential for change towards gender equality. Thank you.